The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Washington, D.C.'s professional football team is moving on from any connection to a Native-themed mascot. This official announcement comes almost a year after the team retired its racist name. For decades, many Native Americans fought to change Native-themed mascots, and specifically the Washington football team. Jason Wright is the team's president and the first African-American team president in league history. Wright says the name change includes listening to Native Americans.
We prioritize listening to the Native and Indigenous community. And while it's not monolithic in its perspective, they were clear in their direction to us.
The team is currently seeking suggestions from fans and will announce the new name and logo early next year. The Grand Portage Band of Ojibwe wants to recover a part of Lake Superior's beachfront from the state of Minnesota. The 1.85 acres of lake shoreline was once part of an indigenous community known as Chippewa City. NorthernWilds.com reports at least 100 families lived there at the turn of the 20th century. After a tightening of the local tax policy, a land speculator paid the taxes and convinced the Ojibwe to sign away ownership. Grand Portage Tribal Chairman Bob Deshawn says the land is a place of great importance to his community. Stacy Drulard, who is a Grand Portage Ojibwe descendant, recorded the history of Chippewa City in her book, Walking the Old Road. Drulard is excited by the possibility of the land being returned to the tribe and talks about her hope for the area.
What I would like, and in a way I feel like this is some of the unfinished business of our ancestors, is to keep it in a natural state and provide a bit of history about that area.
The Grand Portage Band is requesting the state's Department of Transportation return the property and place it in trust status. The local county board, the city council, and the Historical Society are all supporting the tribe's request. A new leadership program is now available for Native students attending Nueta Hidatsa Sanish College in North Dakota. The college, owned by the Mandan Hidatsa in Arikara Nation, is partnering with the Center for Native American Youth to announce the first cohort of leaders for its new Calm Before the Storm program. 7 students will create a community action project centered around making positive change.
We know that young people are capable of making positive change in the community, but oftentimes they're just not given the opportunity, the space, or agency to do so. And so the Center for Native American Youth really prioritizes in letting young people receive technical assistance and resources to make the positive change that they desire to see in the community.
The students met in North Dakota last week to begin developing their project ideas that include revitalizing culture and developing drug and alcohol prevention programs. Well, artists, musicians, and fashion designers met in South Dakota last weekend for Native Pop. As Shirley Snavy reports, the pandemic was acknowledged at this year's annual event.
Held in downtown Rapid City, South Dakota, Native Pop, or People of the Plains, is a gathering of arts and culture. It provides economic development for more than 100 Native American families in the area. MC Bryant Highhorse said this year's theme was to honor survival after the pandemic.
That the people will live well. It takes all of us to bring healing to this world, to the cultures.
The festival featured entertainment, including musicians and a fashion show. Angela Babby, an Oglala Lakota artist who lives in Billings, Montana, took Best of Show.
I've won Best of Show twice now, which is such an honor. And just the encouragement and meeting collectors and the artists, the fellow artists are so inspiring to me. But yeah, this is the best art show. It really is. beats Santa Fe all to heck.
LaFawn Janice is the event's executive director.
I love working with people and I love creating opportunity for people. And POP fits right along in with all of that because, just seeing people thrive is what fills my heart.
In Rapid City, South Dakota, Shirley Snavy, Indian Country Today.
And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. 1 year ago, the U.S. Supreme Court released its ruling on the McGirt case.
What happened in that year? We'll talk with Trent Shores about how this landmark case is affecting tribes and cities in Oklahoma. When the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the McGirt case versus Oklahoma, one tribal leader called it one of the greatest rulings of our time. The decision upheld the boundaries of the Muscogee Nation, which in turn affected other tribes in the state, as well as many cities. Joining us to talk about this decision and how it's played out during the past years is Trent Shores. He's a Choctaw citizen and has a long legal background, including 18 years with the Department of Justice, serving under 4 presidents and 7 U.S. attorneys general. Shores also led the Northern District of Oklahoma as the McGirt decision was being litigated. Welcome, Trent Shores.
Good to be back and good to see you.
Let's start with some background on this case and how it came up and what the past year has been like.
Yeah, when we saw this case come up through the court systems, it actually began with a different defendant, even with the name of Murphy. And both Mr. Murphy and Mr. McGirt were defendants who were Native American and who alleged that their crimes had occurred on Indian reservation land and that they were improperly tried by state courts and that they should have been tried in federal court. Ultimately, these cases, went up through district courts to the circuit courts. The 10th Circuit looked at this and ruled that the Indian reservation in Oklahoma, the Muscogee Nation's reservation, had not been disestablished. And by virtue of that fact, that the conviction was wrong and should be set aside, and this defendant needed to be retried in federal court. In fact, the 10th Circuit described trying to apply certain tests like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And so it ultimately made its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where Justice Gorsuch and 4 other justices, led the way in finding that the Muscogee Reservation, in fact, was never disestablished. At the time of statehood, the reservation continued to exist, and Justice Gorsuch really made this case about textualism. It was pretty interesting. He looked specifically to the statutes and didn't feel the need to go beyond that because Congress needed to clearly express its intent to disestablish the reservation. And he and the other justices said, that's not what happened here. The result was the reservation continues. And as you mentioned in your opening, this decision was applied to 4 other tribes. And as a result, it's changed the jurisdictional landscape in eastern and northeastern Oklahoma. And any case that involves an Indian defendant or an Indian victim, that is removed from state jurisdiction and now transferred over to federal or tribal jurisdiction.
Now, initially, that must have been just a huge workload for the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, it was. Overnight, with the stroke of a pen and the vote of 5 justices, there was a complete change in responsibility, but there were no resources that came with that. The majority opinion, in fact, referenced the fact that the federal government will figure this out because it has to as part of its affirmative trust obligation, its trust responsibilities to federally recognized tribes. But what we saw in actuality was that the responsibility that came was put upon the United States Attorney's offices and law enforcement and the courts with the existing resources. In the first couple months, we saw over 300% increase in our caseload. Today, that is exponentially more for the men and women of U.S. attorneys' offices, our federal judiciary, the federal public defender's office, investigators, probation officers, and I still think they need more resources to meet the need and the need on the ground and the crimes that are coming through their door. It's really impacting our justice system here in eastern and northeastern Oklahoma.
How does that process work? Does that have to be something Congress can do, or can the administration move things around to make it happen?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but certainly when we talk about appropriations, that's Congress's job. The administration can propose a budget, but when we talk about allocating and giving money out or resources, that falls within Congress's duties and responsibilities according to the Constitution. I know that the administration has asked for about $82 million. That's consistent with what Attorney General Barr had asked for at the end of the Trump administration to meet the needs on the ground here in Oklahoma. I know that we hope Congress is looking carefully at this. We both need to build up the federal resources that are here, but also help to support the tribal resources that are on the ground so that tribal jurisdictions can increase their justice system capacity to meet the increased caseload that they too are experiencing.
A year ago, and particularly from the state, but from a lot of folks, we heard really dire warnings about how the whole system was going to collapse. That really didn't happen, did it?
No, the system hasn't collapsed. And as I say, the Chicken Little warnings that we've heard turned out to be a little bit of hyperbole and rhetoric, not something that we're all not familiar with these days. Certainly with the advent of social media, sometimes it feels like we live in the United States of hyperbole. But what we saw is justice systems in the tribal courts and federal system really step up to handle this caseload. Now, that's not to say that there aren't challenges that exist. In fact, there's going to be a forum in Tulsa, Oklahoma tonight, being hosted by the Tulsa County District Attorney and the governor of Oklahoma. And they're going to hear from victims that have been impacted by the McGirt decision. And I think it's appropriate and right that, we listen to what the impact has been on victims as defendants' convictions were set aside and they're having to go through the judicial process again. That's a very real impact and something that is very tough on victims and their families, and a collateral impact of this decision that's not something that we can just ignore.
One story that often comes from these large court decisions, and I think of everything from Bolt to this one, is that it forces tribes and states to work together in new ways, and ultimately that can be a better process. Has that happened in Oklahoma?
Yeah, Oklahoma has a great history of solving problems on our own. Oklahomans working with Oklahomans. And you hear me say that Oklahomans with Oklahomans, it includes Indians and non-Indians. It includes the state with tribal governments. That's what we do here in the heartland. And it's something I think that you're going to see happen here as well. Historically speaking, you find that tribes in eastern Oklahoma have more cross-deputization agreements with their local law enforcement partners than anywhere else in the country. That existed before McGirt, and it's expanded since McGirt. So I think what you'll see and continue to see is a cross-collaboration, multi-jurisdictional approach to law enforcement and public safety to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the public that everyone took an oath to serve. Certainly, that is the priority for everyone, is public safety.
Well, in fact, looking at some of the tribes, particularly the Cherokee Nation, there's been an increase in cases in the tribal courts as well from all of this, and kind of a renewed emphasis.
Yeah, I talked recently with Cherokee Nation Attorney General Sarah Hill. She does a wonderful job leading their justice system, but they have been significantly impacted. They've had to put in excess of $10 million into their court system and their justice system in order to keep up. They filed, I think recently, their 1,000th case. That's been significant. And certainly when we look at the impact on their justice system, it's everything from probation to detention issues to juvenile issues. These are multifaceted, but it's neat to see tribal sovereignty in action, and it's something I think that is redeeming in the sense that it is good, and the tribes are stepping up to shoulder this additional responsibility. But as you mentioned, the tribes are also looking to partner with the state to share, what is really a very costly part of government. It's a core function of government, providing public safety.
What do you think is the most unexpected thing with a year out looking at this case?
I know that we all, in looking at what the possible outcome of the cases could have been, was the impact on resources. I think that talking about it was one thing, but experiencing it was something else entirely. There was an absolute avalanche of cases that rained down. And I think that in seeing the impact on local law enforcement and justice system resources, to me, was the most surprising. The experience of it was overwhelming. It was also encouraging to see these public servants, civil servants step up, working 7 days a week. And that was true of tribal, federal, and state law enforcement officials who really worked hand in hand to try to ensure no cases fell through the cracks and that every victim experienced a measure of justice, even if they were having to go through the process again.
I want to ask you about the Supreme Court. The narrative is usually about the partisanship and so many judges that have been appointed by whatever president. And in Indian affairs, that's just not the case. And also in this particular one, we now have a new expert on the court who's been weighing in considerably with Justice Gorsuch.
Yeah, Justice Gorsuch is, sort of coming from the West, where he was in the 10th Circuit, based out of Denver, comes in having seen a lot of Indian country cases at the circuit level, and brought some expertise and knowledge to the court in that regard. And it certainly seems as if he is and has been persuasive, perhaps, in that role. Just earlier this year, we saw the Supreme Court reaffirm tribal sovereignty in the Cooley case, where they recognize, as we've discussed on a previous newscast here, about tribal sovereignty of jurisdiction over a non-Indian in Indian country. And so it is interesting when we talk about Indian country policy and matters that appear before the Supreme Court. It really goes back, as I mentioned earlier, to textualism. What was the intent of our founders? And just as Justice Gorsuch began the McGirt decision, at the end of the Trail of Tears, there was a promise. That promise was captured in treaties. And so I think you'll see this court look to the promises made by the United States and hold them to that as they look to interpret, what is the impact on tribes and tribal sovereignty today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Great to be back.
And we'll be right back with a look at sports. Tyler Jones is a national news anchor and producer for Local News Live. He's based in Omaha, Nebraska. He's covered sports for many years and has been a play-by-play broadcaster for 7 years and even started his own podcast called The Jones Report. He is a member of the Native American Journalists Association and a senior contributor to Indian sports. This is his first time covering the Native American Basketball Invitational. Welcome, Tyler.
Mark, appreciate the time. Thanks for having me, man.
Well, let's take a minute to talk about what you do first, and then we'll go into the topic.
Well, Mark, it's been quite the journey the last few months, starting this new venture with Local News Live, Great Television's new 24/7 national news network, as we cover the nation from your station, as we say, from coast to coast, working with Gray's 100+ stations across the country. And it's been a dream, to say the least. And we've assembled an incredible staff from all different walks of life to come here to Omaha, and really became family real fast. And I'm excited about this project, where things are at and where we're going with this, and working with all Gray's resources around the country, continuing to grow. So that's been tremendous. Still doing the Jones Report, which actually this upcoming week will be 10 years since I started that show. Since I was about 15 years old was when that thing really hit the ground. And and working with Indian sports and some of my other projects. It's been tremendous. So certainly staying busy and looking forward to getting out to Phoenix this week for this NABI tournament coming up, which all have the pleasure of having the play-by-play call for.
Well, let's talk about that. This is your first trip to NABI. What's high on your agenda?
Well, I'm looking forward just to getting out there and seeing what this is all about. My colleague, Brent Colway, who I've worked with for a long time at Indian Sports, I'll be working directly with him. And just to see this firsthand, a couple years ago, we got to go to the Saboba reservation in California and do the Indigenous Bowl, which was the high school football Native American All-Star game. And now this will be the first event of its kind we've done since then. That was back in 2019. And so to see all this talent around Native communities and get their chance to be seen will be tremendous. And, one of the questions I got to ask from folks is, why is there a need for a Native American specific basketball tournament? And the response that I find myself keep giving, Mark, is that you see these kids from different reservations and different areas that are not getting spotlighted, that are not getting their chance to, show their real talents and getting that exposure to get recruited and try to find a place to play college ball. And now you give them this platform to do so. You're going to have coaches coming in from all around the country trying to find talent. And we're not just talking Division I, we're talking Division II, D3, NAIA. This is their chance to be seen where they wouldn't be seen otherwise. And I'm proud that I get to be a part of telling that story to give these guys and girls the exposure they wouldn't be getting otherwise.
Well, in fact, your story almost fits exactly what you just said about the athletes, and that is the play-by-play. And getting that voice out there that's so rare in television or radio for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, this to me is not a job, Mark, but a calling of sorts. And, I'm going to use every opportunity I can to promote people along the way. And that's what I see with this here is that it's another chance for me to use my platform to help others. And I've always been of the belief, to whom much is given, much is required. And I think this is another chart among that path, is that I can go out there and, use my platform and use my voice and promote those out there, give them a chance, give them that exposure here. Any small part I can play that Brent and I can do with what we've been doing with Indian sports for the last several years, I'm glad to do it, and excited to see what comes of this and where these kids end up going. And even if they don't play college ball, just to have this opportunity to have a national broadcast that we'll be a part of, to have their day in the sun, it's going to be an honor, truly.
How do you approach play-by-play? How do you get prepared for it? And I'm just thinking about, again, a career opportunity for a young person.
Well, that's a great question. And I find myself asking that before each broadcast. How do I want to approach this one as opposed to others? And, you start out with your prep, when it comes to talking to coaches and doing as much research as you can, getting to know the players and tell their stories and go from there. And the thing with play-by-play that's so unique, Mark, compared to traditional studio hosting or even radio, before this job, I was doing a morning drive talk show every day, is that with play-by-play, the events unfold in real time and you have to react as it's happening. You can do so much prep all day long, but the script can kind of go out the window, kind of like breaking news of some sorts, where you just have to fly by the seat of your pants. So we'll do what we can to be as prepared as possible and get to know these players and their families and their coaches and try to tell their stories. But I'm sure that there's going to come a point too, and we're going to have to look at what we have right in front of us and tell the viewer what's there going on. And I think a big part of this story too is just the fact that the comeback of that we've been waiting for these type of things to occur since the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. And that a lot of these players weren't getting to play, weren't getting that attention from not having access during this pandemic, to now they finally get to be on that stage again. I think the comeback is a huge part of this story that we'll be talking about this weekend.
Well, and that's also true for the families and the parents, and the opportunity to see their young people perform in real time.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that's cool about what we're doing here is that, we're going to put together a production that's unlike anything anyone's seen before when it comes to this level of action. And you're going to be able to watch it all across the country. NABI is going to stream this on their Facebook page, and Indian Sports will have it. And we're going all out with the type of production that our team at The Switch is putting together here. And so, we're going to have a big time feel for this. Whether you can be there or not, you're going to get to see firsthand these players have a big stage and a big focus of sorts. So that's what we want to do, is make this as big as we possibly can and give these players the attention they deserve.
Well, as big as we possibly can. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Anytime. Thanks, Mark.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. For all the latest news, go to IndianCountryToday.com. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing rock. This is Indian Country Today.